Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Sundberg and I'm presenting work done with Bradley Gibbons and Tanya Smith from the Endangered Wildlife Trust. We're looking at farmer experiences with biodiversity stewardship agreements, concentrating on farmers with extensive grasslands used for grazing cattle. These landowners give up some of their development rights to the land, and they also take on responsibility for significant changes to their stewardship activity and sometimes their farming practices. We want to know, what did they expect from the program? How do they feel about the program after participating? In particular, we're interested in their stewardship activities, any changes they see as a result, and their concerns about the future. We also want to compare the attitudes of those who joined to prevent mining in their area with the attitudes of those who joined for other reasons. We designed in-person surveys which were conducted on-site and often with multiple family members, sometimes of multiple generations. We did a total of 37 interviews with owners, property managers, and community group representatives. The surveys typically lasted between 1 and 2 hours. This is an example of one of our survey sites, Greater Lochinvar, Mpumalanga. Surveys were designed as an open-ended conversation. Farmers were asked questions and given time to respond in various ways. We asked them why they wanted to participate in the program, and many of them gave us 2 or 3 reasons. Conservation was always mentioned as a motivation, with some farmers discussing more than one type of conservation that was important. Perhaps general conservation, such as wanting to protect the area, protecting water quality, and sometimes preserving specific examples of local biodiversity. Concerns about local mining activity were mentioned by more than half of those interviewed. This group was much more likely to mention water quality as an important motivation. Some farmers thought a protected area would permanently end mining. Some saw it as another tool to try and control mining. This is an oribi that we found resting in one of the protected grasslands in KwaZulu-Natal. Oribi and all 3 crane species were frequently mentioned as examples of animals that farmers wanted to protect. Other motivations were also mentioned occasionally, and I coded those answers as either financial, personal, legal, or community. For financial, answers typically were reduced input costs, which generally meant something like help buying herbicide or using the management plan to improve grassland quality and reduce the costs of winter fodder. Personal typically meant protecting the land for one's own children and grandchildren, but sometimes just for the future. Legal included topics such as help reducing poaching. Other than emphasis on water quality, there were no statistically significant differences in the responses of those who joined to fight mines versus those who joined primarily for other reasons. We also asked about stewardship activity and changes to the agricultural practices. On average, the farmers listed more than 2 significant changes to activity as a result of the management plan. Almost all of them mentioned controlling more kinds of invasive plants, controlling plants more aggressively, and using better control methods. 2/3 of them mentioned changes to grazing practices. Typically, this was having more camps and longer rest periods for grass. And about half of them changed their burning practices, typically how often and what time of year they burned. We spoke to several farmers who were in the process of enrolling who'd already adopted these practices before the area was even protected. Those who signed up to prevent mining showed the same response to stewardship expectations as those who had signed up for other reasons. In general, farmers knew what stewardship was required and were able to describe what they were doing. They were often quite enthusiastic about the various changes expected by the management plan and talked about how it had educated them about their interactions with nature. As one farmer said, "The positive thing is that it made you think twice about what you do. You realize that orchids and frogs are important." We then asked farmers with more than a year of experience in the program about any external help they received for stewardship. These management changes, especially controlling invasive plants, are often time-consuming and expensive. Many farmers felt that the program had promised them access to resources to help with that. A few farmers were quite satisfied, but most were at least somewhat disappointed. Several mentioned that promised help had initially showed up, but eventually disappeared. We then asked farmers to list the benefits they felt they had received from the program. On average, farmers listed 2.5 clear benefits. Landowners with the longest participation in the program tended to have more responses. Many farmers felt that the program had kept mines out of their area, though they weren't always sure how long it would last. Farmers were very happy with relatively quick improvements from implementing the management plan, especially in the quality of their grasslands, more native grasses in particular. Several of them said they had really benefited from the visit by a grassland expert, and they hoped he would come back so they could show him how much better things had gotten. Those with nature reserve status sometimes received tax benefits and were grateful for them, even though that had not been a motivation for joining the program. A few of them also felt that protected area status had increased tourism to the area in general, and perhaps to their guest houses in particular. Some of them provided details like specific changes in wildlife populations, increased numbers of nesting cranes, and better persistence of water during droughts. Farmers with just a year or two in the program tended to say that they had expected improvements such as better wetlands and more wildlife, but they knew that it would take a while for those changes to take place. One interesting benefit was the role of protected area status in other certifications. Two farmers mentioned that they found it easy and profitable to become certified for the Responsible Wool Standard program, since many of the criteria for that program overlapped with criteria for protected area certification. Farmers were asked if being in the program had restricted them from doing anything they wanted to do. Everyone who answered the question directly said there had been no problems. The program didn't restrict them in any way. One farmer said, "The protected environment hasn't stopped me from doing anything, though we do think twice before we do something. There are no negatives. Landowners who wanted to sell to miners told us it would cut our farming options. None of that has happened." Only two farmers told us that they didn't encourage other farmers to join. In one case, an 85-year-old farmer said everyone he talked to was already in the program. In the other, the farmer had been hit by lawsuits unrelated to the program, and he was just discouraged about everything having to do with farming. This is the grassland in a protected nature reserve in KwaZulu-Natal. Despite all the positive findings presented so far, many of the farmers did express concerns about the program. They want more visits from experts, especially grassland experts. They want help identifying new invasives and improved techniques for controlling them. They want to benefit from new scientific findings. We heard that from several farmers. I want to know about the new science. They want financial help for herbicide and labor to remove invasives like wattle, grants for wetland protection projects, subsidies for fencing to increase the number of camps. In general, they want funds that are targeted for specific stewardship activities. I was surprised to hear that some want more inspections. They want to know how they're doing. If there's bad news, they need to hear it, and if they're doing well, they want to hear it. Some of those who joined the program to fight mining feel that the province has just given up fighting mines. They still support the conservation goals of the program, but they say if the mines come, it will all be for nothing. Farmers throughout the region made comments about their inability to get help from the provincial authorities. In most of the provinces, those were expressed as a kind of a "we don't expect to get much help, but we'll do it ourselves" attitude. They felt that if they were going to get outside help, it was more likely to come from NGOs than from the province. As a group, they are skeptical about getting post-proclamation support, but they did not choose to list it as a strong concern. In Mpumalanga, farmers were much more vocal about their concerns. They worried that the lack of post-proclamation support was a sign that the province was no longer interested in having protected areas, perhaps in order to make it easier for widespread mining activity. This was true across the province, even in areas without current mining threats. Farmers often felt that they had been abandoned, in some cases by the NGOs that had previously worked there as well as by the province, and that they had to fulfill their responsibilities without any help. The farmers who were most concerned about mining were also the ones most interested in showing people that they had kept up with their stewardship obligations. They do not want the program to fail, and they feel that they are holding up their end. Some of these concerns were very specific to Mpumalanga and referred to specific examples. However, there's one important consideration. Those protected areas we surveyed have been in place longer than most of the ones we surveyed in other provinces. So this also could partly be an age effect. If you don't get any help for 4 or 5 years, you could get a lot more frustrated with the program. This effect could then show up in other provinces over time. The community representatives we talked with were very pleased with the program. They were extremely happy with the results of the management plan. It showed positive effects on farming, it created jobs for residents, and there were real benefits to the wetlands and the wildlife. They've also received very significant post-proclamation support from the province. So this is an example of a success story where post-proclamation support was adequate and was well received and has had great results. In conclusion, farmers find there are lots of benefits from the program for conservation and for their operation. They're very positive comments about the management plans, and they're very willing to encourage other farmers to join. The standard comment here was, it's a no-brainer. Those who joined to stop mines show a similar conservation ethic and stewardship activity to those who joined for other reasons. There are nearly universal concerns about post-proclamation support at different levels. There are so many good aspects to this program, and support could have a really high payoff. Thank you for your attention and the opportunity to speak with you. We'd like to thank the following people and organizations supporting this project.